Hi, this is Mike Maloney, and I'm joined once again by Adam Taggart. And we just did this amazing interview with Dan Larimer. And it's a little bit long, it's a little bit complex, but you really want to stick around to the end because this is absolutely life-changing information. Dan has answered so many of the questions of how we can rearrange society to best suit the population and create a world of real prosperity and fairness. Hi, this is Mike Maloney, and I'm joined once again by Adam Taggart, and we have a very special guest, Dan Larimer. Dan, how are you doing?
Doing good. Thank you for having me.
Okay. You have a mission, and it's to create free market solutions, voluntary solutions for securing life, liberty, property, and justice for all. Did I state that correctly?
Yep, you got it perfectly.
And you've got a new book. So can you show them the book? More Equal Animals. And I suggest that everybody get this. This is a big argument for freedom. Adam, do you have any questions for Dan?
I got a ton of questions for Dan. And Dan, by the way, it's a total pleasure to meet you here. I'm just very impressed with what you've been able to accomplish with your career so far. Most curious why you chose to write this book and why now. It's clearly you're moved by the inefficiencies and deficiencies of our current system of government. So this book is clearly a reaction to something. What is that?
Well, I've been trying to figure out how to create tools for people to work together and to have freedom. And I started in the crypto world. I said, well, we don't need any governance tools. We have cryptocurrencies, and you just need to let the code be law. But the reality is, whenever you have two or more people, you need to have a way of reaching consensus about the subjective things. And you are more powerful and you're stronger when you're working together with people, because two people is not 1 + 1 is 2, it's 1 + 1 is 3, and so you can increase your individual independence and your power and impact in the world when you're working together and you have a means of reaching consensus. And so I've been doing blockchains, everything from BitShares, which is a decentralized exchange, to Steemit, which is now Hive, which is the first social media platform. And then EOS, which is a smart contract platform. Each of these has like the technical consensus, which the computers are doing. But there's also a higher level consensus, which is the people involved on how do you upgrade the protocol? How do you allocate funds to make sure things go to the right place? And these blockchain communities have struggled with the same types of corruption and graft that you see in our traditional political systems, which have devolved into a two-party system, red versus blue. To a media empire where the media kind of controls who has influence and who's even considered for an election. You've got incumbent advantage, and you've got the Federal Reserve, which is controlling the issuance of all the money. So, while we might presumably live in a democratic government or a Republican government, a republic that's governed by a constitution, the reality is that big tech companies and these choke points in our society are controlling the masses, and our government isn't actually representing the will of the people. And as the government gets more powerful, the people get less powerful. So I spent a lot of time trying to figure out, well, where do our rights come from? And how do we cooperate to establish property rights? How do we enforce those property rights? How do you have individuals come together into a community and maintaining their independence instead of you join a democracy of 100 million people and now you're a slave to the system? You can't secede and leave. Your vote doesn't really change the outcome, and you don't even get control over which candidates are up on the ballot. And the elections aren't even verifiable, right? So those are the problems that I've been trying to solve. And I look back into history to the techniques that can be used to eliminate political parties and came up with a system that's really designed from the law of the jungle, right? You only have the rights which you can enforce yourself. And then what kind of agreements would we want to make with our neighbors so that we don't have to, do everything ourselves, but we don't lose our independence or our ability to say no, or more specifically, our ability to enforce the peace treaty, right? The peace treaty, which takes us out of the law of the jungle, where it's like might makes right, to a cooperative system that benefits both parties. So that's the subject area I explore in the book, is how do you maintain your personal independence? And then how do you cooperate with other people without losing your personal independence, but instead increasing your power? And so that's what More Equal Animals is. It's about making us more equal in power. And it's the subtle art of true democracy versus the systems we have today, which I call democracy in name only, or dino systems.
Securing life, liberty, and property is independence. And you talked about your investment strategy, protecting independence. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Independence starts first and foremost with making sure you control your money, that your wealth isn't subject to anyone else's ability to control your spending or to inflate it away. And so that's why I'm a big believer in both cryptocurrencies and precious metals and other tangible assets as a way of gaining independence.
So you cover a bunch of other topics in the book. Can you touch lightly on some of those?
Yes. So I talk about smart contracts, or what I call a new way of distinguishing, of thinking about contracts in general. And this relates to, I guess, both cryptocurrencies and things like EOS and Ethereum. But it really comes down to property. What things can contracts represent? And should promises be enforceable by law? And there's a whole chapter just that outlines the moral hazard that is created when we attempt to enforce promises under law. And then I relate that to other things. When it comes to like gold and silver, we see how this breaks down. Banks are issuing promises to pay gold and silver, which then turn into fractional reserve gold. And then eventually the promises are defaulted on and we end up with unbacked fiat currencies. But a banking system built on top of smart contracts and that premise would have 100% reserve banks, where there's only one title holder to every ounce of gold in existence, and the property rights are enforced by transferring that gold. It can't be promised to pay, or debts aren't equivocated to notes payable on demand. And so I address all those things, the systematic fraud in the way the banking system is structured, and how that undermines the gold standard. And one of the things that I've been preaching recently about, like Bitcoin versus gold and silver, is gold is actually more divisible than Bitcoin. And what I mean by that is, what's the smallest transaction you can make with a gold coin, physical gold coin, and what's the smallest transaction you can economically make with Bitcoin that's actually transferring on the Bitcoin network? And when you look at the transaction fees on Bitcoin, you'll see that it's hundreds, if not almost $1,000, is the smallest transaction you can do with Bitcoin, because if the fee is not going to take up like 5 or 10% of your transaction size. Whereas with gold, the smallest transaction you can do, I guess you might know better than I, but 1/10 of an ounce of gold can be transacted, and there's no transaction fee. So in that sense, gold is currently more divisible than Bitcoin. And as Bitcoin goes up in value, that difference is just going to be magnified. And that's an interesting fact that I don't think a lot of people in the cryptocurrency space think about.
Actually, I've heard of that from, just a question for you about the platform here, which is, it sounds like the blockchain is really underlying a lot of what you're talking about here, right? So it's underlying the contracts that we make socially. It's underlying the banking system that basically we base our financial system on. And I know in previous videos with Mike in the Gold Silver folks, you've talked a bit about your political playoffs. And that to me sounds, as I understand it, is sort of a blockchain-based election system. So is this really a whole new system that spins around the revolutionary benefits that the blockchain technology is unlocking for folks?
Yeah, the blockchain, first of all, if you're going for independence, the more technology, the less independence you have. So I present in my book ways of doing all this stuff in a low-tech way that does not depend on blockchain. Gold and silver is a low-tech way that does not depend on blockchain. And for that reason, those technologies have greater independence. Blockchain provides us a way to automate things at a larger scale, to have faster transactions and things like that, but it does depend on a more technological base. What I'm suggesting is a different way of fundamentally viewing how we transact with each other, how we write contracts with each other, how we record and log what we say, how we sign contracts, right? Switching to digital signatures that anyone can verify, how we do public records for tracking who owns real estate, who owns title to any assets that have title, for tracking liens on all these assets, and then completely eliminating the concept that people held accountable to their promises unless it's just reputationally. If you want something that's contractually done, it should be able to be represented as a smart contract, even if you don't put it in a smart contract, right? It can be a verbal contract, but the verbal contract would be structured as in, if I don't do this, then title to some other asset is transferred. And that's something that you could write in a smart contract. But yes, blockchain is a foundational technology which allows people to reach consensus given messages that people are publishing into the world.
What I love about what you're talking about is, it seems like the theory is sort of has a timeless logic to it, but we're at a point in history where the technology finally lets us, apply it in a way that sort of frees us from our animal brains, where human behavior kind of comes in and begins to muck things up. So it's fascinating to me that we're sort of alive at this point where we might be able to apply things in the way that you're talking about here. I guess one big question I have coming out of this is sort of enforcement. Right. So I think what you're trying to get away from is the control that those people who are running the system have over the many. So as we talk about a system that's based on these contracts and whatnot, how is that enforced in a way that isn't providing too much power into any one potential hand?
Yeah, this really comes down to the structure of society as a whole. If you have 100 million people all operating under one democracy, you got somebody who's in charge and they can squash any one of those individual people. But if instead you organize society as a democracy of democracies, so you might have 10,000 people in a county, and then you have 3,000 counties in the United States, then each county is an autonomous unit. It can make its decision. It can secede or not. And then each county, they're all equal. They all get one vote. And then you have rules of relative power, which basically says higher levels can't tax the citizens of lower levels. So under my approach, you would not allow the federal government to tax anyone. They could tax the states, and all states would pay the same tax, but the states would have to figure out how to tax the people in order to pay the tax to the feds. That keeps a modularization and loosely coupling, which facilitates the ability to secede, which maximizes the independence of each county, which allows the county to then protect the independence of the people within it. And this approach creates a fractal relationship of power, which makes sure that you can always divide. If the other parties are not agreeing to the peace treaty, right, they're starting to abuse the Constitution or ignore the Constitution, you leave. And that's a nonviolent way of enforcing the peace treaty. And if you need to use force, then you're equally matched. And you never have like one state like California paired with a small state like Idaho or whatnot. And so you don't have these power imbalances where the cities control the countryside, or vice versa. Because if we operated under the principles of traditional democracy, China should rule the world. China and India, they should control everything because they have the most numbers. And we all know that at that scale, that doesn't make sense. But why then should California rule the United States, or Richmond rule Virginia? It's the same kind of thing where numbers don't necessarily make right.
Dan, when you first wrote about the political playoffs in your blog, I tweeted, "Sign me up," because I was just like totally convinced, because this solves a whole bunch of the big problems that you get, where you get these maniacal, power-hungry people that actually don't know what they're doing. They just can convince you that they're the best leader. They shove their way to the front of the room, and they basically say, "Elect me, and I'll tell you how to run your life." So, what are the problems that the current system has that the new system eliminates? Because the randomness does solve a whole bunch of the problems that we currently have.
Yeah, well, the biggest problem we have in the current system is that it can't prevent political parties. And political parties are groups of people colluding to take over control of the official government. So instead of having three branches of government, the legislative, judicial, and executive, we've got a party that controls all three, and the party has its own internal governance that has no requirement to be democratic or representative or any of those things. So because the system of governance that we have allows and can't prevent the formation of political parties, the political parties come in and control. Now you got two parties going back and forth, fighting for control. And that's also an artifact of our voting. Like whoever gets the majority of the votes wins. That's going to always devolve into a two-party system, which won't represent the people. There's another issue is the media, right? The media controls who people can see, who people are told is electable. And they also like slander people and lie. And it's just, you're in the spotlight so much that a lot of good people want to have nothing to do with running for office, which leaves only the power hungry people running for office. And there's another aspect of it is the current system rewards the people who are willing to lie and tell people what they want to hear instead of deal with the truth. And some of the truths out there are quite hard and people don't want to hear it. And it rewards people that are willing to do backroom deals and things like that. The more honesty and integrity you bring, the less likely you are to be able to navigate successfully under the current political system. So the system I approach, I group people into groups of 10, and they're randomly selected. And each group can only vote for members within that group, which means most people don't have to know anything other than be able to evaluate the character and the platform of the people in their group. And then it goes up, and then you do it again at the next level until you elect your leader. And this randomness makes it impossible to form political parties because you have to get 2/3 plus majority in each group. And there's no way to know how these groups are going to be apportioned ahead of time. And this is it's well known that using randomness in this manner, I guess historically it's well known. I guess the broader population doesn't know, but the Amish use it. We use it in the draft. The ancient Greeks used sortition to actually pick people. And the easiest way to understand how this kind of gets a better representation, it's like a sampling process, is I'm going to use an analogy here to say basketball teams. You've got small schools that have a small number of people, and they don't generally have very good basketball teams because they're just pulling from such a small group. But if you take the Olympic basketball team for the United States, is pulling from hundreds of millions of people, and we got the best of the best. And they're so much better than, I guess, the average person. This distribution of skill in basketball is distributed according to the Pareto Principle, which says that 1% of the people have more skill than the other 51% combined. The same thing applies to wealth or media influence or any skill. So 1% of the people have more skill at corruption and evilness than all the rest combined. So on average, society can be full of very, very good people. But the game that we're asking people to play in order to get through power in society is rewarding like the most evil people because they're the ones that can play the game the best. And the political playoff process, by using the randomness, eliminates the ability of those people to get ahead because we also limit the size of any particular group. And all those things together make it more representative and prevents the massive amount of corruption. The easiest way to think about this is, regardless of the size of your country, if you've only got like 100 people or 300 people in Congress, the greater the population gets, the more on the corruption side it's going to be, because you just less and less of the Pareto curve is actually represented in the government structure itself. And that's why small countries, they can be corrupt, but they're not generally as corrupt and evil because they don't have it's like a small school putting a basketball team that's not quite as skilled as corruption. And best by random chance, some honest people might be involved. But the bigger it gets and the more centralized it becomes, the more likely you are to have massive amounts of corruption.
So, Dan, I think anybody watching who's paid attention over the past several elections here in the U.S. Agrees with you that we have a system that really is captured by special interests, run by, this sort of the psychopathic cohort, right, that our system selects for adversely. So what's so great about your system is it gets rid of the adverse selection. It makes the elected process much more based on merit. It has a lot of checks and balances along the way, and that sort of fractal nature you talked about, which is great. So it's very hard for that system to get captured the way that our current system is. I've got two questions for you, if I can ask you to try to address both in your answer here. They're both about sort of the human condition. I sort of think about your political playoffs very much like March Madness, right? Let's say we end up electing the best people for the job. But there's that old expression that, power corrupts. How does your system address somebody who gets into power and, becomes altered by it?
Yeah. Well, for starters, you have to think about governing society as like flying an airplane. You push on the levers and then the flaps move and the economy shifts and things happen. But there's a time delay between when you issue a command on the control and when you start getting feedback of what impact it actually had on society. So if you imagine trying to fly an airplane where you move the joystick, but you don't get the feedback for 10 years on what the consequences are going to be, you're going to crash that plane very quickly because you don't know what's going on. And so you say, oh, we're crashing, and you start shifting it the other way, and it's just like goes wild, out of control. So what that means is we need stability in what the laws are. They should not be changing constantly. And so the way I present it in my book is you elect your leaders. Your leaders might propose a law, but they don't have the ability to propose and ratify a law in their term. So this Congress might propose a law. The next Congress has to ratify it, which means that the people get to elect new people. And if you're not going to get someone that gets into power and says, I promised you I'd do X, I'm going to do not X. And the people get rid of them and then stay on course. And by doing any law that would also automatically sunset if it's not ratified several times, this creates a stable base for society. So the laws are predictable. We don't want to have situations where there's some crisis and all of a sudden we need some law that takes all of our freedoms away. That's just not possible because the system's designed to provide that stable base.
I love that. I specifically love, or particularly love, the sunsetting laws. I mean, our number of laws that are out there has just increased exponentially over time. And I've heard the proposal that hey, going forward, for every new law we propose, we got to take one off the books or whatnot. But I love that sunsetting clause, because that's why only the ones that have true value are the ones that keep getting ratified over time. All right. So my follow-up question was. For folks that haven't read the book yet, you really should. It's just fascinating. And Dan, as you can obviously tell here, has invested a ton of thought into creating a system here from the ground up that just makes total rational sense, at least in the way he presents it. So my question, Dan, is let's agree that it's going to run exactly the way that you envision. Will it be allowed to thrive? Will the current power players let a competing system like this come into existence? What kind of resistance are you expecting from those that are benefiting from the status quo?
It's interesting, because the status quo maintains their power by preventing people from reaching a new consensus. Right? We can all agree that we don't like the current system, but we have no tools to reach a consensus on a new system to replace it. And so censorship and, I guess all the other tools that they use, corruption in the voting and so forth, is designed to prevent people from even talking about new ideas, meeting up, right? Some of these COVID restrictions are designed to prevent people from talking to each other so that they can change the status quo. And that's how they maintain their power. And this system presents a new opportunity to say, hey, if we can just get people together and we use this process, then we know that we've got a new consensus, and we don't need massive media infrastructure, we don't need massive technology, but we can reach a new consensus. And most importantly, it protects the ability of people to reach a new consensus once people get in power. And protecting the ability for people to reach a new consensus is the key to freedom. So of course, the powers that be are going to do everything they can to undermine and prevent people from reaching a new consensus. They're going to divide us by race and sex in every which way they can. They're going to use propaganda, and to some extent, they're going to try to outlaw it. But this process is so simple and so basic and so fundamental and so pure that it's hard to just call it evil and block it or ban it outright. And we're about to find out. On the EOS network, I've created an Eden governance layer, which is going to utilize this process to allocate tens of millions of dollars of community money to fund development in the EOS ecosystem. This is like giving power to politicians. This is real money. This is going to be a real experiment with thousands of people participating in it. And I'm hoping it really revolutionizes the decentralization of blockchain governance. And if people see how powerful this is, then EOS will grow as a currency. And as the currency grows in value, the economic power represented by the currency will grow as well. And who knows, maybe this will eventually transform all of society.
You can actually start another political party, though, that isn't really a party. It is this system. And people can join that system and cast their vote, basically, by electing a representative from their little group to go up to the next level. Because the system is basically, you start with everybody in the United States running for office, and you eliminate 90%, and you eliminate the 90% of that, and you eliminate 90% of that. And in a very short time, you get down to just 10 people. And at that point, you could actually pick one at random, and they're going to be super qualified. The remainder of the 10, they could be things like vice president and so on. There's no way that the media can throw any weight behind any of them. They can't skew the elections. In 2004, there was a lot of evidence that the Republicans stole the election from the Democrats. And then in 2008, I watched, Ron Paul in the primary, the Republican primaries. Ron Paul was really the leader when it came to all of the Google searches and everything else. People were most interested in Ron Paul. And then there was a date when the media just stopped covering him completely, and he faded away. He was the most popular candidate, not just in the Republican primary, but the most popular candidate, period, during that period of time. And then in 2020, we've seen half of the country does believe that that election was completely rigged and stolen, and half of the country doesn't. And so this absolutely prevents all of that. And the randomness makes sure that nobody can. So tell us about that, how it prevents the manipulation by the media or by any particular party or any moneyed interests in picking who's going to run our lives for us.
Yeah, because you're grouped to a random group of 10 people in your community, and those are the only people you can vote for, it does no good to advertise or campaign, because you only really have to get votes from the 9 other people in the room with you, which means we're really leveraging the wisdom of the crowds here, because instead of expecting everyone to know everything about everything in order to cast a vote for someone who they may or may not trust or may not be lying, they only have to know about the people in the room. And so media power has no influence whatsoever in determining who can advance. And your ability to address large groups doesn't matter. You just have to be particularly persuasive to the group you're in. You need to be a consensus builder, somebody that can practice nonviolent communication to really connect with and empathize with the various people in the group in order to advance. And so hopefully the process will optimize for a different set of qualities and traits that are not quite as psychopathic or sociopathic compared to traditional politicians. And if we can select for that, you're right. At the end, we can just do randomness. Well, 1 out of the 10, that's the president, because they're all qualified, but this will be more representative, and it prevents people from buying all the way up, because even if you buy all the way up to the top, you've got a 1 in 10 chance of winning. You spend all that money trying to bribe, it's not really going to go very far for you. And as you advance, you're competing against more and more skilled people. I use the analogy that if playing politics was like playing chess, or sorry, running a country is like playing chess, is by analogy. You want to have the best chess player. And you want to see people that actually demonstrate the skills of playing chess. But instead, if China was going to pick their best chess player to go up against our best chess player, you're going to put them in a match to determine who's going to win the trade war. Would you want to elect it based on who says, I read some books and I know how to do it, and I'm telling you my strategy? You have a whole bunch of voters who know nothing about chess playing. They're more misinformed than informed, voting on the chess player. Or do you want to just say, all right, let's have a tournament. Let's pair people up randomly, see who wins, pair them up randomly, see who wins. And now you actually know you've got a winner, because, it's just like we identify the best basketball players or any sport leagues, we're filtering. And I think that process is far better than a direct vote, because you're actually testing the skills that are needed in a way that's not adversely selecting for the negative skills.
All right, Dan, I'd love to ask you a question I think most viewers are asking in their minds, which is, hey, if this sounds really interesting to me, I'd love to support something like this. You mentioned that there's sort of a pilot or some initial deployment of this happening soon. My main question is, what is your main ask of those folks who are listening? Is there a way in which they can, begin to participate in this, even in the pilot you talked about or whatnot? But what would you ask of the person who's inspired by what you've just described here? What could they do?
Yeah. Well, first off, it's no consensus system works unless people understand it, right? We need more people to understand that the current democracy is not really a democracy, right? It's a democracy in name only. And we need more people to understand the principles that I outline in my book. Because if you can't get other people to at least agree on these principles of this is how an election should be run, and this gives legitimacy to it, then we're just going to be stuck, right? And we have an opportunity here once, in a century, or, once in multiple generations, when the system collapses, right? Because I do believe that the system is in the late stages of a collapse. And we're going to have to form new institutions, and countries are going to secede, and there's going to be a lot of chaos and ability to form something new. And if we don't have people educated in the principles, we're just going to form a new system that's going to end up just where we are now, in another 100 years. And the cycle will repeat. So getting people to read the book's free, buying the book and then giving it to them, getting familiar with the principles. Those are all things that you can do with or without what I'm doing. The other thing you can do is apply these principles locally. Let's say you have a church. You need to pick leaders in the church. Well, you can do this with a deck of playing cards and a congregation of 200 people, and people can get experience with the process. And then if you want to join the EOS community, you can go to eoscommunity.org, get involved in the EOS ecosystem, get invited into the Eden experiment, actually participate in playoffs. And then if you win, you're given a budget to go promote adoption of EOS as a currency and whatever else the EOS community wants to do in the world. So that's a whole spectrum of things that you can do to be involved. So that's eoscommunity.org is where a lot of these concepts are being organized.
Great. eoscommunity.org. Your very impassioned and I think very accurate summation there reminds me of a famous Winston Churchill quote where he said, in a crisis, the ideas that get implemented are those that are already on the table. And if listeners like you expect that the current system we have is going to break down at some point, kind of our job right now is to try to get better ideas onto the table now so that when people are casting about in crisis for something better, it's a tool that's on the table that can be grabbed.
Yep, exactly. And the time's not very long, so we really need to spread these ideas quickly, which is why I'm so thankful that you guys have me on here to share this with your audience.
Oh, well, thank you. One of the things for our viewers, they may not know much about EOS, and EOS has more than a $7 billion market cap. So it's actually a very serious, you call it an ecosystem. Tell us why you call it an ecosystem.
Well, it's an ecosystem because it's a currency. All currencies are ecosystems that have lots of people building independently and integrating with it. If you want independence, the first thing you have to do is take control of your money. So the EOS ecosystem is people are choosing to use EOS as their currency. And this has been proven very successfully in Venezuela, where EOS is the only cryptocurrency that can work because transactions confirm in half a second. The transactions are basically free. And they can't afford to use Bitcoin or Ethereum or these other cryptocurrencies that down there in Venezuela, but they've got hundreds of businesses where people are buying their groceries and renting scooters and taxis and using EOS because their currency has been collapsing. And it's just the only cryptocurrency that's suitable. So, I believe that EOS is like getting an idea on the table. It's a new currency that's, it's a couple of years old now. It's got the most scalable blockchain technology. Soon it's going to be powered by, this Eden governance model based on more equal animals. And that's going to be allocating tens or hundreds of millions of dollars per year to hundreds of people in the community to grow. So I'm very excited to see how EOS as a currency, as a blockchain, as a smart contract platform can really impact the world to realize my mission of free market solutions to secure life, liberty, property, and justice for all.
Dan, you've done a great job of really laying out, I think, just a transformative model for a much fairer and I think freer way of really sort of managing society. I mean, really everything from social agreements to how we transact and run our economy and how we govern ourselves. And I've got to think that a lot of those same tenets and principles also apply to the flow of information in media. The question I have for you is, not only has our government largely been captured by special interests, but so has the media. And so much of the information that we receive today is coming through somebody's filter. And we've all seen the stats, the major media outlets all roll up to like 3 or 4 major corporations. We all saw a lot of the censorship we've seen the increase in censorship in media, but it was certainly on full display in the recent U.S. presidential election, where very large, long-standing media sources were declared fake news, or you can't report on that. And I think we have a crisis of trust in the media right now. In fact, I did a great interview with Matt Taibbi, independent journalist, on this a while ago, and he definitely corroborated this. So I know that you are heavily interested in this, and in addition to all your work that you've done with EOS and the Eden Project that you mentioned, you have a new venture called Clarion, which I believe is sort of created to address a lot of those issues I just mentioned about media and too much control and censorship. Can you elaborate what you're doing there?
Yeah, so Clarion is all about allowing anyone in the world to talk to anyone else in the world that wants to listen without any middleman, so that you have independence and freedom in your communication. And ideally, we'd all have a radio, and we'd all have our own radio station, and we can all listen to anyone else's radio, and there's just nothing anyone can do, right? That would be maximum freedom of everyone to communicate with everyone. Communication is the most fundamental aspect of consensus building. You can't reach a consensus if you can't communicate. You can't have a democracy if you can't communicate. Instead, when communication is restricted, somebody has the power to control the narrative, to limit the facts, to lie, and therefore they've got more power than everyone else. So building consensus, having an honest governance system in society, having independence, all depend upon having tools that allow us to communicate with one another without third parties interfering. And I'd like to take a minute to talk about censorship, because censorship is a concept that people throw out there without necessarily understanding what it means. You can have censorship. It's not necessarily the freedom to say whatever you want to say. Censorship is when two people who want to talk are interfered with by a third person who's preventing them from talking. In that case, someone who's spamming a network and making it so loud and noisy that two people can't talk is also censoring people. And so there's a need to have tools that allow the people who want to talk, the people who want to follow you and hear what you have to say, and preventing people from getting in the way. And that's necessary to secure a democracy. So Clarion is just a tool that eliminates the dependency we have on service providers, right? Your email account, whether it's with Apple or Google or Microsoft, is owned by these companies, and they could turn it off at any point in time. And but with Clarion, you can basically get the same features as email, except your email account is simultaneously on all three platforms and on your friends and family's computer, so that no one can shut down your ability to send and receive messages with other people, both private messages and public messages like tweets. And it's because your account is controlled by the same technology that your blockchain accounts are controlled by. And it's even more decentralized than blockchain, because I can communicate with you without having to worry about anyone else in the world being involved in that communication. Whereas blockchain, everyone has to broadcast to the blockchain, and then you need some kind of governance to limit which transactions or which messages are allowed on the blockchain, because there's only a limited number of bandwidth for the blockchain. But with Clarion, it's infinitely scalable. It's logically decentralized, which means there's no central point of logical order that's required. And it's a fundamental tool to build consensus and new governance systems, which is probably even more fundamental than blockchain at the end of the day, is protecting our freedom of speech.
Is that running on proof of stake?
It is not a blockchain. There are no tokens involved.
Wow.
It is just a protocol that allows you to send messages to and from other people, for people to follow you, and to basically relay by word of mouth and the connections messages from people. And you can verify them because they're all cryptographically signed. But you don't have any centralized account registry. There's no blockchain, no one else you need. You can just download the tool, invite your friends and family to your own private network of it. And now you've got a private version of Facebook where you're just sharing your photos of your kids and your cats with them without having to worry about these big companies being an intermediary in what you're doing.
Can you run video on it?
Yes, the goal would be to support YouTube-like functionality, leveraging the power of tools like IPFS. There's going to be, every computer in the world becomes a server on this system. And so you can relay videos and images and whatever type of content you want to distribute.
Wow. So, in the content creator space, like Mike and I are in, you really do have to play by the rules of the big platforms. And, thankfully, our businesses benefit by being on platforms like YouTube, which most people are probably watching this on. But we've seen a lot of players in our space, either leave because they got demonetized or they had their channel shut down because they talked about topics that the regulator du jour, didn't like. And so this sense of this, sort of uncensorable platform has a ton of appeal, I think to the many content creators out there like us. And then, as you said, I think there's just many, many people who care about civil liberties who are kind of shocked and appalled at the control and the invasion of privacy that big tech companies who are running the major platforms, particularly social media, have into their lives. So I don't want to get too wonky into the details, but you mentioned that this is highly distributed. It's sort of everywhere. I assume though that there is kind of bulletproof security. In other words, that if I have private messages or pictures of my family and bits of them are distributed everywhere, it's not that people can actually see that unless I give them permission. Is that correct? Correct.
The only content that ends up on your computer is the content from your friends and family or someone that you're choosing to follow. So you're not going to have to worry about people sending illegal content to be stored on your computer, unless of course, you're following someone who's publishing it. But this is leveraging the relationships and the trust we have in our friends and family to kind of insulate us based on your social networks. This is not a system like a lot of peer-to-peer systems where your computer is being used by anonymous individuals to store anonymous content. And when you do send a message, it's encrypted just to the recipients that you want to have it. Now, nothing can prevent them from decrypting it and then broadcasting it on to other people. But in principle, it's more secure than anything else because unlike Facebook, even when you send it from person to person on Facebook has a copy and they're indexing it and they're doing stuff. When you send email through Google's indexing everything you're doing. But when you send messages here, it's far less likely that it's going to end up in someone else's hands.
Great. Well, look, we'll start wrapping things up here. Thanks for giving us so much of your time today, Dan. Mike, as we're kind of wrapping up here, any other questions you have for Dan before we begin the sign off here?
In More Equal Animals, Dan, your book, by the way, I want to tell everybody, Dan's book is free and you can go and download it or you can buy a copy on Amazon right now if you want to give a physical copy to somebody. Please go and get this book because he solves a whole lot of society's problem by solving the root cause of the problem. The root cause of the problem being the way we create government. And if we can govern ourselves better, then a lot of the problems that happen won't happen. They'll just go away. But you have a list here that, in order to have a true democracy, it's got to be composed of independent people. Independence defined as the ability for the minority to secede, resistance to covert control by minorities, where the 0.1% can't capture control. Survive a systemically misinformed population, and so on. Is there anything, Dan, that you want to say about this list of what it takes to actually have a true democracy? Tell us the difference between true democracy and what we've got, what you describe as a Dino.
Oh, yeah, democracy as a concept is that the people should be in control and that the rules should represent the people. So What we have today is an illusion where the people in power say, yes, we represent you, and we're lying to you about the fact that you're actually in control, right? It's the giving the kid in the backseat of the car a steering wheel that they can drive, and they can pretend that they're driving, but they're not really driving, right? That's what the powers that be do. They have you go to the voting booth and cast your vote, but you're not really driving. That vote's not really deciding anything. It's not who votes that counts. It's who counts the votes. It's who picks the candidates that you're allowed to vote for, right? You can have any color car you want as long as it's black. It's that kind of illusion of democracy, illusion of control. The thing that makes this possible, the only way that this works, is for people to take responsibility for their lives and to choose to be independent. Independence has a cost, right? It's not free. It's more work. And so the challenge we face is, the powers that be are giving money to people. They're making them comfortable. Come use my centralized service. I'll take care of all your worries. And now you're a slave because you've allowed yourself to go the easy route instead of the independent route, right? And then we have this confusion between freedom and independence. People say, I want freedom. Well, you want freedom from your bills. You want freedom to do whatever you want with someone else covering the cost. That's not freedom. What you want is independence, which means responsibility to take care of yourself. And in order to have your freedom, you need to be independent, and the people in your community need to be independent. And then you need to work together to ensure that your community is independent so that your community can protect the independence of the people on and on up. So, you can design the best system in the world and put it in the hands of a bunch of monkeys, and they're going to mess it up, right? You can, if you have a bunch of dishonest people, even the best system in the world is going to fall apart. I personally believe that most of us are good-natured at heart, and we can empathize and relate to our fellow humans, and that on average, people are good. The problem is we have adverse selection that is selecting for the people that are bad. And then we've got all the moral hazard and consequences of fiat money that cause people to have short time preferences. And that kind of corrupts the population and lulls them into complacency and so forth. So like what I was saying earlier, it's very important that people understand that the importance of independence, the importance of, I guess, giving up a little bit of economic wealth in order to have independent wealth and freedom wealth and healthy food and things like that. If we just allow money and dollars to guide us, then we're just going to be corrupted. We're not measuring the full cost of everything that we're doing. We're not measuring the fact that we're decaying as a culture, even as our bank balance sheets are going up because they're printing more money. We need to factor in the whole picture. We need to educate those around us, and then work together to take responsibility for our lives and the lives of those around us.
Wow.
All right.
Back in 2007, I was interviewing Ron Paul. One of the first things he said to us is that we should be more concerned about we shouldn't be as concerned about the loss of our wealth as the loss of our freedom. And that had a big impact. I want to thank you so much for saying that. What were you going to say, Adam?
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think those are great principles to end this discussion on. And Mike, I think you just put the bow on top of it. So thank you for that. Dan, thanks again for giving, A, so much time with us today, but really, B, putting so much obvious thought, hard work, and creative thinking, into not just tackling these big problems, but actually coming up with scalable solutions that really do seem to get to the root of the problem there, and to create a system that, I think has a lot of viability in potentially replacing the one that we have here. We've got a lot of people that are talking about the problems. We have precious too few people actually developing solutions. So thank you for being one of those pioneers. And with that, folks, we'll talk to you again soon.